Okay. Well, we're in a study of, it's called Apocalypse Now. This is the third class. And the reason I call it Apocalypse Now is, and someone made a comment to me, don't you feel like that's an infringement on copyright? You know, because there was a movie called that. But no, because apocalypse is not their term to use exclusively, because it's in the Bible. And it is the word translated revelation in the book of Revelation. The apocalypse of Jesus Christ, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, which is translated, that's chapter 1, verse 1, which is translated the revelation of Jesus Christ. And now is the idea I want to discuss. I want to go through the book of Revelation and talk about how it applies to us now, because that's the biggie, isn't it? I mean, every time you turn on the religious channel, that's an exaggeration, not every time. But I know last week I got up, flipped on the TV, and there was a guy on there talking about how the book of Revelation is being fulfilled now. And so, apocalypse now, apocalypse now, apocalypse Torah now. And so, how does it apply now? Is it being unfolded now? Is it happening now? Was it a prophecy about the 21st century? And if it's not, which it's not, does it apply to us now? Well, none of the Bible was really written to us now. All of the letters that Paul wrote, and that Peter wrote, and John wrote, were written to the Christians at that time. And usually were addressing issues that they were facing. So do they apply to us now? Well, the issues probably don't, but the truths do apply to us now. And so that's what I want to do. I want to get to the book of Revelation and go through it and talk about what it meant then, how it applied to them, the Christians then, because it wasn't written to non-Christians. It was written to Christians who were going through something that John needed to address, or Jesus needed to address through John. That's the nature of the book. So, but does it have application to us today? There are things, there are truths from it. Just like the epistles of Paul and John and Peter, they all have truths that will apply to us, even though the letters were not addressed to us. Okay? So, my contention is that apocalypse was a style of literature. I've covered this the last two lessons, and we'll hopefully maybe end that discussion today. But it was a style of literature of that period of time, just like poetry is a style of literature for us today. The type of poetry used. The Old Testament used poetry, the book of Psalms, or songs. They're songs, and they're poetic, but they're Hebrew poetry, which is different from our poetry. Our poetry finds rhyme. Hebrew poetry takes a thought and then repeats the thought, generally. That's most of the Psalms. Like, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That's a Hebrew poetic structure, that they're equal. The first line, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, those are equal. If God's will is being done, then his kingdom has come. Okay, so what we're doing is we're looking at apocalypse. Everybody say apocalypse. Apocalypse. That's the way that's the way it's pronounced in Greek, apocalypse. And the only reason I do that is having lived in Greece for 10 years, I got used to saying that, and so that's what first comes to my mind instead of apocalypse. Even though I do say apocalypse, it just depends on what's in my mind at the moment. Okay, so we looked last week in looking at, and what we saw was that apocalypse was a style of literature that was popular during the Second Temple period or the intertestamental period.
Literally means to uncover.
Huh?
It literally means, the word means to uncover.
Yes.
Cover off.
The word, thank you, Becky. The word literally means to uncover. Calypto means to cover. Apo means un or from. And so it means to uncover. Or the English word reveal is not a bad word for it. You're revealing something that was previously covered up. Okay? So the Jews that we saw from Isaiah chapter 13, verse 9 to 11, and then verse 13, Isaiah he slips into an apocalyptic mode in talking about God's judgment on Babylon. And that happened in 539 BC. So he wasn't, even though he talks about bizarre scenes, things that the earth goes through, things that the heavens go through, he's talking about the judgment of Babylon. And then he says, verse 10, for the stars of heaven and their constellation will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Verse 13, therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place. Did those things literally happen when Babylon was judged? And we know it's Babylon because of verse 1, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Then verse 19, and Babylon, the beauty of the kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So he's talking about God's judgment on Babylon because Babylon had taken Israel into captivity and destroyed Jerusalem and tore down the temple, which was God's will for them to do that. But then he's going to judge them for doing it because of their wickedness. So the point I'm wanting you to get is that whenever God spoke through the prophets and began to talk about judgment on Israel or on any other nation, it's not unusual for him to use language that describes destruction of the universe, a dismantling of the creation. And that's what came to be called apocalypse. It was a style of writing and a style of speech. We went to Isaiah 34, which again was a description of, verse 5, for my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom and upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. So he's talking about judgment on Edom. And so he uses, if you look at just 1 through 4, look at draw near, O nations, to hear and listen, O people, let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs forth from it. For Yahweh's indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. So their slain will be thrown out, and so on. Verse 4, and all the hosts of heaven will wear away. Well, have the stars ever worn away? all the hosts of heaven worn away. The sky will be rolled up like a scroll, and their hosts will also wither away. Did that happen? Has it ever happened? No, no. So these are apocalyptic terms. Whenever you come to a piece that expresses the destruction or end of the creation, or a dismantling of the creation, then you have to pay attention and say, okay, is this literal, or is this a figure? Is this apocalyptic? It could be apocalyptic, and usually is. Seldom are these expressions by the prophets intended to refer to the end of the world.
It was the end of their world. I mean, for them, for the ones that the judgment is against, that's the way that.
Right, and that was
the sky, everything.
Yeah, and that was my opinion. I think I shared with y'all last week that this is really describing the world, the creation, from their perspective. I mean, God forbid, but they're talking about nuclear war now. And if the worst case scenario happened, and we started having atomic bombs exploding all over the United States, and we're dying by the millions, and going through starvation and all of that stuff, that would be the end of our world, wouldn't it? We wouldn't see the sun shining. The sun wouldn't be shining for us. So my opinion is that apocalyptic is expressing the end of creation, the end of the world for the enemy. For the enemy. For whoever God is judging. Okay. Isaiah 19. Isaiah has a lot of this. The oracle concerning Egypt. So who's this talking about? Egypt. And it's talking about God's judgment on Egypt. Behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. Well, did the idols tremble? No. Now, idols can be used to refer to the gods that the idols represented. Were there other gods?
Not living gods.
Not really. But were there spirits? Were there spirits behind these idols? I believe there were. And I get this from Paul in the Corinthian letter, where he cautions the Corinthians about eating meat sacrificed to idols. And he does refer to them. He said, what you're doing is really doing this to demons. So there were demons, I believe, behind the idol. Okay. Okay. And the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. Micah chapter 1, verse 3. Let's see, Matthew, Mark. Amos, Andy. Let's see, Micah chapter 1. Let's start with verse 2. Hear, O peoples, all of you. Listen, O earth, and all it contains. Let the Lord God be a witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Behold, Yahweh is coming forth from his place, and he will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. The mountains will melt under him. The valleys will be split like wax before the fire. like water poured down a steep place. All of this is for the rebellion of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel. So you've got a judgment scene, but in all of them, have you noticed that he talks as though it's for the whole world? He does. But then he comes in and narrows down and says, this is who I'm going to judge. Okay? Verse 5, all of this is for the rebellion of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? What is the high place of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? For I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country, planting places for a vineyard. I will pour her stones down into the valley. I will lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be smashed. All of her earnings will be burned with fire. All of her images I will make desolate, for she collected them from a harlot's earnings, and to the earnings of a harlot they will return. Destruction, judgment. And whenever the prophets talked about destruction or judgment, they would describe it as a cosmic thing, as a universal thing. Is this making sense to you?
That's how bad it is.
Yeah. I guarantee you, if we go through a nuclear holocaust in this country, well, I hate to say it this way, but I believe from the Old Testament, from the lessons I've learned there, that it'll be from God. He'll be judging this nation for our sins. And the sad thing is that when God judged Israel, for example, were there righteous people in Israel?
Yes.
But did they suffer too? Yeah, they suffered along with the wicked. But God made it clear to them, you're not being judged in this. Well, they're suffering the same fate, but their suffering is not judgment from God. Okay. Nahum, chapter 1, verse 5. Well, let's start up. Verse 3. No, verse 2. Oh, let's just read from Genesis. No. Verse 1, the oracle of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum, the Elkoshite. A jealous and avenging God is Yahweh. Yahweh is avenging and wrathful. Yahweh takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. Yahweh is slow to anger and great in power, and Yahweh will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In the whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. Verse 4, he rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon wither. Mountains quake because of him, and the hills dissolve. Indeed, the earth is upheaved by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken up by him. Judgment. And it takes on a cosmic flavor as the prophets describe it. Okay? So, let's look to the New Testament and see many of what we have referred to as second coming passages are not second coming passages. They're apocalyptic. Well, the prophets used apocalyptic terms, right? Was Jesus a prophet? And what we learn is that Jesus preached as a prophet judgment upon Israel for rejecting him, rejecting the Messiah, and for their sins. And this was fulfilled when the Roman Empire came in 70 AD, 40 years after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, and destroyed the temple and destroyed Jerusalem and scattered the Jews throughout the known world at that time. So Jesus, as a prophet, is going to preach, he's going to talk to them about the judgment that God is going to bring upon them. But guess what? He uses what kind of language? Apocalyptic. Look at Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 27, for the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then recompense every man according to his deeds. Okay? What does that sound like? Judgment. His second coming. That's what it sounds like. But if you go to verse 28, which is right after it, truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So, either there's some really very old disciples of Jesus that are over 2,000 years old who are still hanging around, or this isn't meant to be taken literally. Are you following me? This is apocalyptic. It's just the kind of language we would expect a prophet to use. And he's addressing Jerusalem. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it follows, I don't have my Bible because I can't read it anymore. But that next chapter talks about when Jesus was transfigured before the three apostles. Could it mean that he was talking about that? That was
Talking about his transfiguration.
mm-hmm.
Well, did he come with his father, with his angels, and recompense every man according to his deeds at the Mount of Transfiguration? No. Now you're probably referring to seeing the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And there have been those who argue that. And I think verse 28, even though the original text didn't have verse breaks like ours do, it's just one long, continuous. I think I've shown that to you before. You have to just know the language to know when there's a break. But it appears to me that verse 28 and 27 are connected and not starting a different topic. Verse 27 is clearly talking about judgment. The Son of Man is going to come with his angels and recompense every man according to his deeds. He's talking. He hasn't stopped talking. Truly I say to you. And then 6 days later, this event happens. So I don't feel like it's a good contextual understanding.
What do you think the 28 is saying? I mean, because if it's a continuation of 27, the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father and will judge all people. And I tell you, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming.
Yeah.
How do you take that? Even apocalyptic, how do you?
Well, what I understand is that Jesus, has been resurrected 30 years, 40 years earlier, and he's on his throne, according to multiple texts. He's on the throne of God, and he's ruling the universe. And because of Israel's sin, the Bible would teach that God brought the Romans to judge Israel for their sin. And Jesus is saying that, okay, on the earth, it looks like Rome is doing it, but in the heavens, I'm the one doing it. Me and my angels are the ones that's bringing judgment on Jerusalem. Okay? We see this, early on in the Bible. Elisha is with his servant and Dothan, and the Syrians surround them, and they're going to try to kill Elisha, and the servant wakes up, sees him, and says, "Oh, wake up! We're in trouble. We're undone." And he says, "No, we're not. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And he prays that the servant's eyes would be opened. God opened his eyes, and he saw the hills full of chariots of fire. Now, could anybody see those chariots of fire? No. Only if their eyes were opened. Were those chariots of fire really there? Yeah, and I don't know that they were actual chariots. God is allowed, this is his spiritual force. They probably don't really look like chariots, but so that the servant could understand that there's an army, a spiritual army of God here to protect Elijah. Then that's the way God portrayed it to him. So whenever wars take place, again, this gets into a kind of a argumentative area, but where wars take place, there's spirit forces behind them.
Well, they credit, like even in World War II, like the invasion of Normandy, they credited the weather, I think, for delaying and keeping Hitler's forces from coming. And they credited God.
Yeah, I'm glad they did, but whether they credited it to him or not, he was involved. I believe that the Allies, who we call the Allies, won this conflict because God wanted them to win it. And it's not just what happens on the ground in the physical realm. The Bible indicates that there's spirit activity going on that determines those outcomes. We see this in the book of Daniel, where the angel appears to Daniel and tells him that he was trying. Let's look at it. I think it's part of apocalyptic, really. Daniel prays to understand a vision that he has in chapter 9 and 10, and then it says an angel comes to him. Then behold, verse 10, behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. Let's back up. Verse 4, and on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the banks of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze. And the sound of his words were like the sound of a tumult. Now, he says, I saw a man. That's not your normal guy, is it? That's chapter 10, Daniel 10. That's not a normal guy, is it? He faints, verses 6 through 9, and the angel, then behold, verse 10, he faints, dead out, because of the vision. Then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I'm about to tell you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he says, then he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come to in response to your words. His words were help me understand this. Because Daniel recalled it's been 70 years in captivity. God had promised through Jeremiah that Israel would be in captivity for 70 years. The 70 years come to an end, and Daniel reminds God, say, hey, it's not reminding God, but he's telling him, hey, 70 years is up. What's supposed to happen here? What am I to understand? And so God sends the angel to tell him. He says, verse 13, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. And so he's explaining why it took him 21 days to get to him to answer his prayer. Why? Because the prince of the kingdom of Persia. Well, a prince was able to withstand this guy? No, he's talking about another angel. We'll see that in a minute. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So we know who Michael is, right? So he's the archangel. He came, and that's why he calls him a chief prince, because archi means chief in Greek. Archangel, archieangelos, chief prince, and he calls him a chief prince instead of an archangel, came to help me, for I have been left there with the kings of Persia. So there's a war going on. And you've got angels representing the kingdom of Persia. And these angels evidently are against God's angels, and they're trying to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And God's angels are stopping them. Okay? Now I've come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. Verse 18. Then one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me, and he said, O man of high esteem, do not be, verse 18, verse 19, do not be afraid, peace be with you, take courage and be encouraged, and be courageous. Now as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said to me, do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So is there a fight going on? That's what he says. One angel fighting against another angel. And it may not be, my vision is it's not individual angels. You've got chief angels warring against another chief angel, and they have an army of angels behind each of them. That's my opinion. I shall now return and fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. And historically, that's what happened. Greece rose up to power again and defeated the Persians through Alexander the Great. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writings of truth. That's going to be chapter 11. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these except Michael, your prince. Now, why have I read this text? Because of Josh's question. How does Jesus with his angels bring his kingdom in a judgment scene on Israel? Well, Roman Empire, just like Persia came, the Greeks came and defeated the Persians, and the Persians came and defeated the Babylonians. What we're learning from this text in Daniel is, that there's spirit forces behind these earthly armies. And God is accomplishing his will through these battles performed by these angelic beings.
And also by the prayers of the people.
Our prayers impact what God does. Okay?
It's just like all through Judges when, they were turned over to these other people. That was essentially, because when God says, my anger burned against them because they turned away from me and they started worshiping this and that, and so I turned them over to the Midianites or whatever. That was just, instead, it was God using that army to accomplish his.
God uses that army to discipline his children, as in the Judges. What we learn here is that there are spirit forces behind it. Okay, that it's not just who's the strongest army. It's who's got the largest spirit force. Isn't that what Elijah told his servant? Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Well, is he saying we're more than they are? No. It's not who we are, it's who's behind us. Okay? And that's why I say if we suffer destruction of our nation, it's because God's forces were behind it. And it's going to be because our nation deserved it. God never punishes anybody flippantly. It's amazing. The lesson I learned from reading the Old Testament is when you get to Israel, God pleads with Israel for at least 200 years as they're worshiping idols and prostitution in the temple and all this stuff, and offering human sacrifice, killing their babies, and God pleads them, please don't do that. He sends prophets and says, please stop doing that. Please don't do that. If you don't stop doing that, I'm going to have to hurt you. I'm going to have to punish you. Please stop. And he does this for so long that I get weary as I read it. I'm saying, you need to get those guys. And my wife says, I'm glad you're not God. Okay? So, but then when it comes to my sins, no, don't do that. I'm glad you don't. Look at Matthew 24. We'll close with this one because we're out of time. Matthew 24 is a typical text that people use to say that it's referring to the end of the world and Jesus coming, because they look at verse 29. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. And so people read that. What does that sound like? The rapture. What we call the rapture, which is a word that never appears in the Bible, which is a made-up term to describe what many Bible teachers believe is the end of time coming of Jesus with his angels in flaming fire, like this text here is, and they called it the rapture. And it's a term that has stuck. But if you come down to truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now, for his Jewish audience, this was not mysterious. They were used to hearing prophets say these words all the time. In fact, I don't know, my Bible, whenever it comes to quotes, when it's doing, providing a quote from the Old Testament, it puts them in caps. Does your Bible do that? If somebody's saying a quote from the Old Testament, do you have a way of telling that it's a quote from the Old Testament? Yeah, mine puts Old Testament quotes in caps. And almost this whole thing of verse 29 through 31 are quotes from the Old Testament. This is a New American Standard. But like when he says, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven. Have we read that before? In Isaiah, and it didn't have anything to do with the end of time. He's a prophet, and actually he's an Old Testament prophet right at this point, because New Testament hadn't started yet, had it? It doesn't start really until the death and resurrection of Jesus. So he's an Old Testament prophet. And he speaks with the characteristics of an Old Testament prophet. And he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. How do I know? Look at verse, go back to chapter 23, verse 37. Well, verse 36, truly I say to you all these things, and he's talking about the woes that he pronounced upon the people of Israel and the leaders of Israel. Truly I say to you all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. House in this context would refer to the temple. For I say to you, from now on you shall not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And he's quoting an Old Testament piece. And then Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. Why would they do that? I mean, can't he see the temple buildings? Hasn't he been there before? Why are they pointing out the buildings? Because he's just told them, your house, this temple, is going to be left desolate, destroyed. Verse 2, and he answered and said to them, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here. What stone is he talking about? The temple shall be left upon another which will not be torn down. So that's what he's been talking about. That's what he said. Your house is going to be destroyed. Then he says, and as he was sitting on Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? What things? The tearing down of the temple. That's the context. When will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming? Why would they associate his coming with the destruction of the temple? Because he had just said, you'll not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And he connected it with the desolation of the temple, the house.
And they understood that as judgment.
They understood it as judgment, and that he was going to do it. He was going to bring it about.
But in 36 he says, however, no one will know the day or the hour.
That's right. Angels don't know it, and he doesn't know it.
Only the Father.
But it happened in 70 A.D. when the Romans came in and tore it all down.
So that's referring to the destruction.
Yeah. When we come over to 29, where he talks about the sun being darkened and the moon not giving its light and stars falling out of the sky, that's an apocalyptic judgment scene. And in this text, it's referring to Jerusalem in 70 A.D., where it was quoted from in Ezekiel and Isaiah and Joel and Amos and all of those is referring to other judgments. They use the same terminology to refer to other judgments. It's God speak. It's God speak. That's how he talks when he talks about judgment. Okay? All right.